It was an early morning at the Secret Service headquarters in Washington, D.C., a time when most of the building was quiet, with the usual calm of a normal workday setting in. But then, the sudden screech of tires broke through the stillness, causing a few agents to glance up, their curiosity piqued. A motorcade, unusually large and far from scheduled, was pulling up right in front of the headquarters. The quiet chatter in the halls turned into hushed whispers as agents glanced at each other, wondering who could be arriving at such an odd time. Everyone knew that any high-profile visit to this place had to be scheduled in advance. This wasn't just any visit, this was something else. The motorcade came to a halt, and as the doors swung open, an unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable silence swept through the building. The usual crowd of press, photographers, and news reporters was nowhere to be seen. This wasn't a public event, no cameras were rolling, just a few official vehicles, pulling into the parking lot. And the man stepping out of the car was none other than Donald Trump. With no fanfare, no planned announcement, he simply stepped out of the vehicle, surrounded by a small group of his staff, no entourage, no media circus. The shock hit the agents immediately. They had been trained to expect the unexpected, but this was beyond anything they could have anticipated. As Trump made his way toward the building, not one agent knew what to make of the situation. What was going on? Why was he here? There was no scheduled meeting, no briefing on the calendar. And yet, there he was, walking through the front doors, as if this was all perfectly normal. Whispers began to ripple through the ranks. "Is this some kind of drill?" one agent muttered under his breath. "No idea," another replied, glancing nervously toward the entrance. It was rare enough for any high-profile guest to arrive without prior notice, but this was different. This was Donald Trump, a man with one of the most recognizable faces in the world, and there was no media coverage, no scheduled appearance. Just him, his staff, and a lot of questions hanging in the air. The confusion in the air was palpable. Some agents stood frozen in place, unsure of how to respond. Others quickly started whispering to each other, trying to figure out if anyone knew what was going on. The headquarters, which usually followed a strict routine, suddenly felt uncomfortably off balance. No one knew if they should greet him, if they should stand at attention, or if they should remain silent and wait for instructions. The room buzzed with uncertainty. As Trump walked through the building, there was a strange sense of calm about him, almost like he was completely at ease. He didn't seem rushed or anxious. No one saw the usual signs of someone visiting a place like this, no anticipation in his eyes, no sense of awkwardness at the unfamiliarity of the surroundings. Instead, he moved like he was exactly where he needed to be, walking with a purpose but with no clear explanation. He wasn't meeting with anyone. No handshakes, no pleasantries with staff or agents. He simply kept walking, ignoring the usual formalities, as if he had been there many times before. The agents, who were used to dealing with unexpected events in high-security environments, had to quickly adjust. But this wasn't like anything they had been trained for. He wasn't just another VIP showing up with their scheduled protocol. This was a former president, one with a reputation for unpredictability, stepping into their headquarters without any prior notice and without any official announcement. This wasn't just about security. It was about something else. The air was thick with tension as they tried to piece together the reason behind this sudden, unplanned visit. Why was Trump here? What was he after? And most importantly, what came next? Inside the headquarters, every agent who caught sight of him couldn't help but stare. Some agents exchanged glances, trying to find some kind of pattern or explanation for his arrival. But nothing added up. Nothing fit the usual routine for such high-profile visits. Normally, these things were carefully orchestrated. But this felt different, and that only made everyone more uneasy. The uncertainty hung in the air like a cloud, and the agents couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to unfold. The headquarters, which had once felt like a well-oiled machine running on a strict schedule, suddenly felt uncertain, like it was waiting for something it wasn't prepared for. Trump's presence wasn't just surprising, it was unsettling. The normal hustle and bustle of the morning gave way to quiet murmurs and raised eyebrows. Even the security officers, who had trained for every possible situation, couldn't quite figure out how to respond. Should they immediately jump into action? Or should they wait to see if there was an explanation coming? The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to break the tension. The building, usually calm and controlled, suddenly felt on edge. What happened next would set the stage for everything to come, but in that moment, the mystery was just beginning to unfold. The agents had no idea why Trump was there, and even more strangely, neither did he seem interested in explaining it. He walked into the building as if he were right at home, like he belonged there, no different from any other person walking through those doors. And for the agents watching him, that was the most puzzling part of all. Why was he here? And what was he really after? They couldn't know yet, but the confusion was only just beginning. As Trump entered the building, a sense of uncertainty settled over the agents, but what happened next made the confusion deepen. With no hesitation, he moved through the security checkpoint with an ease that seemed almost too comfortable for someone who wasn't a regular visitor. There was no pause to greet anyone, no formalities like the usual handshakes or introductions. Trump didn't seem bothered by the security checks that most people would be wary of. In fact, he breezed through the procedures as if he were a part of the furniture, no nervous glances, no unnecessary pleasantries. It was as if he was used to being here, even though that was impossible. He wasn't an active president anymore, and he had no reason to be in the building. The agents stood by, confused, their eyes following him as he walked without acknowledging anyone. He wasn't walking with the typical air of a VIP who expects attention. No, Trump moved with a level of assurance, almost as though he was a part of the place, like he belonged there more than the people around him did. His presence was almost chilling, there was no question about his confidence. It was the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who knows exactly what they're doing and where they're going. And yet, the agents couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. What was he doing here? Why had he bypassed all the usual protocols? Was there something more to this visit than anyone knew? Trump didn't stop to chat with any staff members or even glance at the agents as he walked by. Normally, a visit from someone of his stature would include at least a few obligatory greetings or a quick word with the security detail. But none of that happened. He just walked through the halls, with purpose in every step. It wasn't the casual stroll of someone on a tour, it was the walk of someone who had been here before, someone who had the right to be in these spaces without needing anyone's permission. The agents, who were trained to be observant and alert to unusual behavior, couldn't stop wondering why he was behaving this way. It wasn't just that he wasn't following the usual formalities, it was the fact that he wasn't following any of the expected routes either. Instead of heading towards the main offices or the designated visitor areas, Trump turned down an unmarked hallway, a place where few outsiders ever ventured. The hallway wasn't designed for visitors, it was more of a back passageway, one reserved for staff or secure access. And yet, without a second thought, Trump headed straight for it. As he walked down the hallway, the agents exchanged confused glances. This wasn't right. There was a sense of unease in the air as they watched him disappear down a path no guest should have taken. Was this part of his planned visit? Had someone authorized him to be here? The hallway, lined with unmarked doors and leading to areas that were far more sensitive than the usual meeting rooms, was not a place most people would want to go, especially not without prior clearance. So why was he heading there? It didn't make sense. The more the agents tried to piece together what was happening, the more questions piled up. It wasn't just about his sudden appearance at the headquarters. It wasn't just about bypassing security checks. It was the whole manner in which he carried himself. There was something about his confidence, his calmness, his refusal to acknowledge the unusual nature of his visit, that felt unsettling. This wasn't just a former president visiting a government building, this was someone who seemed to have no regard for the usual rules. And yet, he wasn't being stopped, or questioned, or even questioned twice. He just kept moving, as if everything about his presence here was entirely normal. The agents, now standing in a more tense silence, couldn't shake the strange feeling that Trump knew something they didn't. There were murmurs among them, but no one dared to break the silence out loud. Everyone had the same question on their minds: why was he here? What was he really doing? A few agents tried to follow his movements quietly, but they kept their distance, unsure of whether it was appropriate to approach him. They had been trained to handle high-profile figures, but this felt different. They had been prepared for the usual visits from dignitaries or foreign leaders, but nothing about Trump's visit seemed to match what they had been taught. He wasn't just any dignitary. He wasn't behaving like someone who had to follow the rules. He was doing the exact opposite. As he continued walking, the agents couldn't help but feel the atmosphere shift. There was a subtle tension in the air, something they hadn't felt before. No one knew what was coming next, but one thing was certain: Trump wasn't just here for a meeting or to check in on a security procedure. His behavior was completely off-script, and it was starting to feel more and more like something bigger was unfolding right under their noses. Trump reached the end of the hallway, where agents had no clear way of knowing what he would do next. It was almost like he was acting on instinct, bypassing all the expected formalities without a single care. The unease among the agents grew stronger as they tried to make sense of the situation. Was there a plan they weren't aware of? Was there some kind of hidden purpose behind this visit? And then, just as quickly as the confusion had set in, a new question began to form in their minds: what did he know that they didn't? He wasn't acting like someone who had lost his position or his power. He was acting like someone who had a deeper understanding of the system, someone who knew exactly how things worked, whether he was supposed to or not. As Trump's figure disappeared further down the hallway, out of view, the agents were left standing, their curiosity now a full-fledged sense of worry. The usual calm had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of mystery. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't normal. And that was the problem. Nothing about this visit was normal. As the agents stood in the hallway, still trying to make sense of Trump's strange behavior, the unexpected happened. The air was thick with questions, but suddenly, Trump had reached his destination, the Secret Service training room. This wasn't a room where politicians or public figures typically visited, and certainly not one where anyone would expect a former president to walk in without any notice. The tension in the air intensified as Trump pushed open the door and stepped inside. The usual flow of activity in the training room, agents going over drills and exercises, came to a halt. Eyes turned toward him, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. It wasn't just his unexpected appearance that caught everyone off guard, it was the way he carried himself. Trump wasn't here to observe. He wasn't here to make a speech or shake hands with the agents. He was here for something else entirely. Without any words or explanations, Trump headed straight toward the center of the room. His movements were deliberate, almost methodical, and there was an odd calmness about the way he walked. He wasn't rushed or frantic, he was measured, focused. There were no signals that he had come to participate in any training session. Yet, there he was, standing at the heart of the room as if he had every right to be there, as if he was as familiar with the drills and exercises as the instructors themselves. The instructors and agents exchanged confused glances. What was he doing here? Why was he walking toward the mat like he was about to engage in a demonstration? But the real shock didn't come until Trump made eye contact with one of the Secret Service instructors. The instructor, a seasoned veteran who had trained hundreds of agents over the years, looked at Trump with a mix of curiosity and confusion. They had no idea what was about to happen, but they certainly didn't expect what came next. Trump's actions were swift. Without hesitation, he took a position across from the instructor, and before anyone could process what was going on, he was ready to demonstrate something. What was a former president doing on a training mat? Why was he facing off with a professional instructor, who was clearly prepared to teach or demonstrate a particular technique? The questions didn't stop. Then, in the blink of an eye, Trump made his move. The entire room seemed to pause. His movements were smooth, calculated, nothing too flashy or over the top. What was remarkable wasn't the speed or intensity of his actions, it was the control he exhibited. It was as if every step, every motion, had been rehearsed 1,000 times. Trump moved in a way that surprised everyone. There was no aggression, no excessive force, but his technique was effective and incredibly precise. It was a fluid motion, almost like watching a practiced fighter, someone who had honed these movements over time. The way he reacted, the way he anticipated the instructor's moves, wasn't just impressive, it was startling. His lack of hesitation showed that he was comfortable, in control, and experienced. This wasn't a show or a stunt, it was a real demonstration of skill. The instructor, clearly taken off guard, found himself in a position he wasn't prepared for. Trump didn't throw wild punches or reckless attacks. Instead, he used calculated force, expertly countering the instructor's moves with a methodical ease that suggested he had done this before. And then, with a movement so smooth and quick, Trump did something that no one expected: he took the instructor down. It wasn't brutal or overpowering, it was almost surgical in its precision. One moment, the instructor was standing, ready to continue, and the next, he was on the mat, staring up at Trump. The room went silent. The shock was immediate. No one knew how to react. The instructors, who had spent years training agents in physical defense, stood frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a demonstration, it was a clear display of skill, real skill, something that seemed out of place in a room that had seen countless combat techniques and drills. The instructor, still sitting on the mat, stared up at Trump for a long moment. His face was a mix of disbelief and surprise. Finally, he stood up slowly, brushing himself off, and in a voice that was tinged with confusion, asked, "Where the hell did you learn that?" Trump, without a hint of arrogance, simply adjusted his jacket, his tie hanging loosely around his neck, and replied, "Let's just say I've been around." His calm, nonchalant answer didn't provide much clarity, but it sent a ripple through the room. The agents, who had been watching with wide eyes, exchanged nervous glances. They had no idea how to interpret what they had just seen. Some of them were still in shock, struggling to process it. Others, though, couldn't help but be impressed. There was no telling how many of the agents had trained for years to master the same techniques, but what Trump had just done wasn't something they had expected from a former president. It wasn't just his ability to defend himself, it was his timing, his precision, and the way he moved. His actions weren't the result of a lucky guess or a chance move, they were the result of someone who had clearly spent time developing these skills. Trump didn't act like someone who had never been in a fight. He moved with confidence, with knowledge of the steps, the sequences, and the purpose behind each maneuver. Some agents whispered under their breath, wondering if Trump had some hidden past they didn't know about. Others, though, began to suspect that this wasn't just a one-off show. His calmness, his ease, his natural control over the situation, there was something unsettlingly familiar about it. He didn't carry himself like a politician or a celebrity, he carried himself like someone who had been in high-pressure situations before, someone who had been trained for moments like this. It raised more questions than answers. And then, just as quickly as it had started, Trump was done. He turned around, casually straightened his jacket, and walked out of the training room as if nothing had happened. There were no words, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the stunned silence he was leaving behind. His footsteps echoed in the room, and the agents stood frozen, unsure of what to make of it all. Some were still processing the shock of the moment, others couldn't believe what they had seen. Had it been a fluke? Or had Trump actually known what he was doing? The tension in the room lingered long after Trump had left. The instructors stood together, exchanging quiet words, trying to figure out how they had missed something so significant. For the agents, the shock of what had just happened began to sink in. What they had just witnessed was no ordinary demonstration. It was a clear message: Trump wasn't just a former president. He wasn't just a figurehead from the past. He had skills that no one expected, and those skills made everyone rethink who he was. He wasn't the person they had imagined him to be. As the agents and instructors in the training room tried to process what had just happened, the wheels were already turning in the surveillance room. High up in the Secret Service headquarters, senior officials were watching the footage of the surprising demonstration. They had been alerted to the unusual visit just moments after Trump's unexpected arrival, and now, they were witnessing the aftermath of what appeared to be a highly unorthodox and revealing moment. The room was filled with tension as the footage replayed over and over, showing the former president's controlled movements, the calm way he had taken down the instructor, and the reactions of everyone present. No one had anticipated this, and now, no one could quite figure out what it meant. The senior officials sat in front of the large monitors, their faces serious as they watched the replayed footage of the training session. The mystery surrounding Trump's visit had only deepened. There was no announcement of this demonstration, no clear explanation of why he had chosen to show up at the Secret Service training room unannounced, and certainly no hint of what he was trying to prove. The unexpected nature of it all made it clear that there was more going on than met the eye. The air in the surveillance room felt heavy with the weight of unanswered questions, and as the footage continued to roll, one of the senior directors leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. He had seen many unusual things in his time, but this was different. This wasn't a routine visit. This was something that felt far more significant, and the implications were beginning to dawn on him. With a sharp gesture, the senior director motioned for a pause in the footage. The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to him. His face was serious, focused. It was clear that the display of skill Trump had just shown was not something to be brushed aside lightly. He turned to the other officials in the room, his voice calm but laced with a note of concern. "We need to take a deeper look," he said, his words hanging in the air. "Get me Trump's security files, especially anything from the past few decades. There's something we're missing here." The senior director's request sent a ripple of activity through the room. The quiet hum of computers and the tapping of keys filled the space as team members began pulling up files, reviewing any past intelligence on Trump's history, his connections, and his movements over the years. As the officials dug deeper into the records, it became apparent that there was more to this visit than anyone had realized. The footage had been disturbing in its calmness. Trump had acted with an unsettling familiarity, not just with the techniques in the training room, but with the very process of walking into a secure government building with no warning, no scheduled visit, and no announcement. This was not how a former president, especially one as public as Trump, was supposed to behave. As the search for answers continued, the senior director sifted through reports, pulling up records from Trump's previous terms in office, as well as any security details from his private life. The further they dug, the stranger things seemed to get. There were odd gaps in some of the records, moments when it appeared that certain details had been purposefully left out. As one official pointed out, it wasn't just the unannounced visit that was concerning, it was the fact that Trump had moved with such ease and control through the Secret Service facility. He hadn't flinched when walking through the security checkpoint. He hadn't stopped to greet anyone, as one would expect. Instead, he bypassed everything, walking straight toward the training room like he had done it 100 times before. For a moment, the idea that he might have had prior knowledge of the facility seemed too unlikely to ignore. The more they reviewed the footage, the more the officials began to realize that something was deeply unsettling about Trump's behavior. It wasn't just that he had taken down an instructor with ease, it was the fact that he had done so in a way that suggested a level of physical skill and training that no one had known about. He had moved with precision, timing his actions in a way that was neither hasty nor overpowered. He had demonstrated a calm authority that was not usually associated with someone who had spent years in politics or the public eye. And now, as they watched the footage again, the question that lingered in everyone's minds was clear: where had he learned these skills? The tension in the room grew thicker as more information came to light. The officials began to piece together a larger picture, one that involved not just a former president with a hidden set of talents, but someone with a much more complex past. Every detail from his past, every hidden file, now seemed to matter. There were references to overseas trips, connections to places that raised more questions than answers. The deeper they delved, the more they began to sense that they were uncovering something far more significant than they had initially thought. It became evident that this wasn't just about a simple training session gone awry. There were layers to Trump's past, hidden connections, unexplained actions, and things left unsaid that were now coming to light. The officials realized that they might be standing at the edge of a much bigger story, one that could shake everything they thought they knew. There were whispers about past ties to foreign governments, secretive meetings, and moments from Trump's career that had never quite added up. As the senior director continued to pore over the details, the sense of unease in the room only intensified. He knew that the investigation they had started would only lead to more questions, more secrets, and ultimately, more answers that they weren't sure they were ready to hear. Finally, after what felt like hours of digging, the senior director leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The room was still and silent, each person absorbed in their thoughts as the realization began to sink in. They were no longer just watching a routine visit unfold. They were witnessing the tip of an iceberg that, with each new file they opened, was becoming bigger and more complex. The mystery behind Trump's visit was only the beginning, and what lay ahead was something none of them had anticipated. As the investigation into Donald Trump's unannounced visit continued to unfold, the team of senior officials, still reeling from the shocking events of the day, turned their attention to the next step in uncovering the truth. The questions surrounding Trump's behavior and his hidden talents were just the beginning of something much deeper. In the Secure Intelligence Office, a sense of urgency filled the air as more classified documents were pulled from the vaults and spread across the table. The room, dimly lit with a quiet hum of technology, was now the setting for what was turning into a far-reaching investigation. One by one, the officials sifted through the confidential records that had been carefully guarded for years, each file offering a new clue, a new possibility. Most of the documents had been marked with high-level security clearance, with the words, "Top Secret," stamped on every page. The deeper they dug, the more they began to uncover a history that didn't match the public persona everyone was familiar with. The Trump they thought they knew, a billionaire businessman and former president, wasn't the only version of the man who had walked into that Secret Service training room earlier that day. There were parts of his past, hidden away in these files, that painted a very different picture, and with every page that was turned, it became clearer that there was much more to Trump than anyone had realized. Among the first documents to be uncovered were reports from the 1980s, decades before Trump would ever step into the White House. These papers contained references to foreign dealings, travel, and mysterious connections that hadn't been fully disclosed to the public. As one senior official carefully examined the reports, his finger traced a line on the page that seemed to jump out at him. Moscow, it read. The name of the Russian capital stood out like a beacon in the sea of text, sparking an immediate wave of intrigue. Why was Moscow mentioned in these documents? What connection did Trump have to a place that had long been associated with political intrigue and shadowy dealings? The revelation hit like a jolt of electricity, and suddenly, everything about the former president's past seemed open for reevaluation. The mention of Moscow wasn't just a casual reference. The document included details about a trip Trump had made to the city, a visit that had taken place under strange circumstances. There were no records of a major diplomatic visit, no press coverage, no public statements about his purpose there. In fact, the trip had been shrouded in secrecy, and the official reports only hinted at its true nature. The more they dug into these details, the more questions arose. Was this a routine business trip? Or was it something more covert, something that tied into a larger geopolitical game that Trump had been a part of long before his political career? The documents offered no easy answers, only more layers to the mystery. As the documents piled up, the tone in the room shifted. What had begun as a routine investigation into a strange visit had quickly turned into something far more significant. The officials began to realize that they were uncovering a series of connections, ones that went back decades and stretched across continents. The records showed that Trump's dealings were far from ordinary, his business interests, his interactions with foreign powers, and his travels all seemed to suggest a man who had been deeply involved in a web of international affairs long before he ever entered politics. As they pored over the classified documents, it became clear that Trump's ties to Moscow weren't just a fleeting moment in time. They were part of a larger pattern, one that was carefully hidden from the public eye. The reports mentioned multiple visits to Russia, interactions with key figures in the Russian government, and even business ventures that were never publicly acknowledged. The more they read, the more the dots began to connect. Trump's rise to political power was no accident. His connections, his wealth, and his influence had been built on a foundation that extended far beyond the borders of the United States. The more the team uncovered, the more they understood that the surface-level story they had always been told about Trump wasn't the full truth. His past was more complicated, and his connections to foreign governments were far deeper than anyone had imagined. With every new file, a clearer picture emerged, one that was filled with covert meetings, undisclosed business deals, and a level of global maneuvering that suggested Trump was much more than just a businessman turned politician. But the documents were only the beginning. The true scope of what they were uncovering was still unknown, and with every new revelation, the stakes seemed to grow higher. The officials knew they couldn't just stop at these papers, they had to go further, look deeper, and find out the full extent of Trump's connections to Russia and other foreign powers. But as they read the last few pages of the most recent report, one thought echoed in all of their minds. What had they stumbled upon? What kind of history had they uncovered, and how much of it was still hidden, waiting to be discovered? As the day wore on and the room filled with more questions than answers, a sense of unease settled over the officials. They had expected to find something, but this was more than they had ever imagined. The documents laid bare the shadowy connections that Trump had kept hidden for so many years, and the realization that there was much more to uncover loomed large over the investigation. There were more files to review, more connections to trace, and more mysteries to solve. But one thing was certain, the Trump they thought they knew was not the one they were beginning to understand. The man who had walked into the Secret Service headquarters that morning was tied to a far-reaching network of power, influence, and secrets that had been carefully concealed from the public for decades. What came next, no one could say for sure, but one thing was clear: this investigation was just getting started, and the truth was far more complex than anyone had anticipated. As the hours passed, the atmosphere at the Secret Service headquarters shifted. What had started as a day like any other had quickly turned into a whirlwind of confusion and intrigue, and now, back at HQ, the shock of Trump's unexpected visit lingered. Agents and intelligence officers alike found themselves whispering in small groups, discussing every strange moment of the day, trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. Theories were tossed around, each more outlandish than the last, but none of them seemed to fully capture the scale of what they had just witnessed. There was a sense of unease in the air, as though everyone knew something big had happened but couldn't quite put their finger on what it meant. At the center of it all was Trump, a figure who had always been a source of fascination and controversy, but never like this. This visit, this sudden appearance with no notice or explanation, felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the narrative they thought they knew about him. What had he been trying to prove? Why had he chosen this moment, this setting, to reveal a side of himself that no one had expected? His calm yet precise actions during the training session, his unorthodox approach to the entire visit, it all left a lingering question in the minds of the agents: what was the real purpose behind his actions? The more they thought about it, the more they realized that Trump's behavior didn't seem like an accident. It was as if he was sending a message, but what that message was remained unclear. Was he trying to demonstrate something? Or was this visit a deliberate way of testing the Secret Service, of reminding them of the skills he had kept hidden for so long? Every small detail from the day seemed to add to the mystery, leaving the agents to question whether there was more to this visit than met the eye. The shock of what they had seen earlier in the training rooms still hung over them, and the more they talked about it, the less certain they became of what had truly happened. Was it a fluke? Or was there something deeper at play here? As the discussions continued throughout the headquarters, one thing became clear: the agents couldn't shake the feeling that they had witnessed a moment that was significant, but how exactly it was significant remained up for debate. Some felt that this was just a strange, isolated incident, a fluke that would fade into the background with time. Others, however, couldn't dismiss the nagging feeling that Trump's visit had been a calculated move, one that would have long-lasting consequences for how the Secret Service would approach their role in the future. The uncertainty hung in the air like a thick fog, with no one quite sure of what to make of it. Meanwhile, in the intelligence offices, higher-ups were still poring over the footage, trying to make sense of every movement, every word, and every action that had taken place. It was clear that they were grappling with the same questions the agents were asking. What was the purpose behind Trump's visit? Was it just a random occurrence, or was it something more? The more they analyzed the footage, the more it became apparent that Trump had come prepared. He had not just wandered into the building for a casual visit, he had known exactly what he was doing, and that fact alone was enough to stir up an unsettling sense of mystery. As the day began to wind down, a quiet realization spread through the corridors of the Secret Service headquarters. Trump's visit had not only been an event that caught everyone off guard, but it had also set into motion a series of questions that no one was ready to answer. What was he truly capable of? How much of his past had been kept hidden? And most importantly, what was his purpose in showing up that day, seemingly out of nowhere, with no explanation and no warning? The agents and officers who had witnessed the events firsthand now found themselves pondering Trump's true abilities and the secrets he had kept buried for so long. It wasn't just about his skill in the training room, it was about everything that had come before, the hidden aspects of his life that no one had known about. The revelations had left them with more questions than answers, and the uncertainty of it all continued to weigh heavily on their minds. As the final hours of the day drew to a close, a sense of tension remained, hanging in the air like a thick cloud that refused to dissipate. Even as people began to file out of the headquarters, the conversation continued. Everyone had their own theories, their own suspicions, but no one could say for sure what Trump's visit had truly meant. The only thing they could agree on was that it wasn't just another day at the office. It was an event that had changed everything, even if they couldn't quite explain why. In the end, the mystery of Trump's visit remained unresolved, and the agents and intelligence officers were left to wonder whether they would ever truly understand the purpose behind it. Had he come to prove something? To send a message? Or had it all been a test of some sort, one that no one was meant to pass? Only time would tell if the answers to these questions would ever come to light, but for now, all they could do was reflect on what they had seen, and wait for the next chapter in a story that was far from finished. As the screen fades to black, the mystery of Trump's visit lingers in the air, leaving viewers with more questions than answers. The whole day had been filled with strange moments, unexpected actions, and unsettling revelations, but nothing had really been explained. The agents, the intelligence officers, and even the viewers at home were left wondering, what was the true purpose behind Trump's unannounced appearance at the Secret Service headquarters? Was it a mere coincidence, or was there a deeper, hidden meaning behind everything that had happened? And perhaps most importantly, what did this visit say about Trump's past, his capabilities, and the role he was still playing in the bigger picture? The camera zooms out from the headquarters, leaving behind an atmosphere of suspense and curiosity. Every detail from the day, Trump's confidence, his mysterious behavior, the shock in the training room, and the secret files that had been uncovered, now feels like part of a much larger story that's yet to unfold. The pieces of the puzzle are scattered, but they don't quite fit together. There's something about the whole situation that feels unfinished, and that's exactly what makes it so intriguing. Could this be the start of something bigger? Was Trump's visit just a glimpse into a hidden world of secrets, skills, and connections that no one really knew about? Or was it simply an isolated, random event that will be forgotten as time passes? As the closing scene plays out, the camera lingers on the faces of the agents and officials, their expressions full of doubt and wonder. The questions are still in the air, and the viewers are invited to join in the speculation. Was Trump trying to send a message? Or was there something else happening behind the scenes that no one fully understands yet? The unanswered questions only add to the sense of mystery, leaving everyone to ponder what really took place that day. The video ends with an open invitation. What really happened during Trump's visit? Was it a sign of something bigger? Drop your thoughts below. The screen fades to black, and the silence that follows is filled with anticipation. The story may be over for now, but the questions remain, and the viewers are left to fill in the blanks. What will they believe? What theories will they come up with? It's a chance for everyone to reflect on the strange events that have unfolded and share their own interpretations of what could have been a much more significant moment than it initially seemed. The mystery remains, and it's up to each viewer to decide what the truth really is.